Alrighty, good morning, Mustang families, and welcome. We're excited to have you here with us. My name is Matt Hills. I'm the principal here at George Mason High School. I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Peter Laub, our assistant principal, Mr. Dave Sorensis, our other assistant principal, who will be here shortly, and then Dr. Rory Dippold, our middle years program coordinator. We're all going to be presenting and talking to you a little bit about what it means when we say standards-based learning and grading. I am allowing some other folks to join us. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so it looks like we have a nice group of folks with us this morning. Thank you all for being with us. When you take a look at standards-based learning and grading, we always want to point out that this is all about transforming learning. You're going to hear a little bit about what that looks like today. That's going to be the logistics, the under the hood look at inside your child's class, how they're actually engaging in this learning. And the real reason we wanted to add learning to the title is because it's not just about the grading process. Yes, we all recognize and understand that that's an important piece to students when they're going through their assignments and their assessments. But learning is a journey. You're going to hear that word often today. And this journey actually occurs throughout the entire year. And when we think about the students and what they're experiencing, there's a lot that goes into learning. It's not just about completing an assessment. It's not just about ultimately completing an assigned task. It's making sure that we're taking a look and building the whole student. And I think it's important to recognize when we want to transform learning and we think about standards-based learning and grading, that's ultimately what it's all about. You're going to hear a lot about that today. What we're going to do is we're going to give everyone an opportunity on this call to ask questions, but I would ask of you to wait until the end. We're going to get through our presentation. Probably takes about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have opportunities for specific questions at the end. Many of those questions that you have might be related to individual courses. I would ask you to hold off on those particular questions. That's something that we can definitely circle back on. We do want to make sure that the teachers of those courses are involved in those conversations because we think there are specific nuances associated with each course. And so that's something that isn't lost on us. And we want to make sure that we're having our entire team there when we're addressing some of those individual classroom questions. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Dr. Rory Dippold, who's going to talk a little bit about what the goal is today.
Okay, thank you, Principal Hills. So there are four main goals for today's presentation. It's to calibrate our shared understanding of core principles and research behind SB, and G. I know many of you are familiar with standards-based learning and grading from Henderson or from Mason last year. So the goal is just to calibrate and to review, and I know some of you are also new to it as well. The second goal relates to the three PowerSchool categories of practice, formative, and summative, and how to read it and understand it, and then to monitor your child's progress. The third goal is to understand how quarter grades are reported, and then the end of year reporting also. And the last one is to really provide strategies and resources for you to be that partnership with us and your child to help them learn and grow through this process. So very excited to have you here. And also one more thing to just add is that we will be asking at the end of this presentation for a Google form if you would like these slides. So know that we will be providing these presentation slides, but we will send them to you after the presentation. Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Peter Laub.
Hello, everyone. How are you this morning? Thank you for joining us. So I'm Peter Laub. I'm a new assistant principal here at George Mason, but am quite familiar with our work here. I've been a teacher at Mason for the past 10 years, so I'm excited to be here in a new role. And last year, I had the opportunity to serve as the standards-based grading coach here at George Mason as we onboarded this initiative in our high school. And so I'm going to speak to you today a little bit about the background of it. I recognize a couple of the names of the folks that are here, so thanks for coming back and learning again. So if you would go to the next slide. So just as an overview, these are the courses here at George Mason that will be utilizing standards-based learning and grading in their classrooms this year. And we've focused here, as you can recognize, primarily in the 9th grade with a couple of 10th grade courses. And as Dr. Dippold was saying, the alignment here has to do with our NYP criteria, and I'll talk a little bit about that more. And as you know, our IB-MYP program is the program of learning for grades 6 through 10 here in Falls Church City. And so that's just to emphasize for you all where that overlap comes from. So this quote, I think, is helpful as a frame, for a philosophical frame perhaps for this work. So the biggest shift in education is shifting from teaching kids what to learn to teaching kids how to learn. Now, I don't think that standards-based learning and grading is the first instance of this shift taking place. George Mason's been an IB high school for decades, and I think that at the core of the IB program and why it is so valuable, I think, for our students, is that it does emphasize teaching kids how to learn. It is a concept-based curriculum. It focuses on mastering skills and developing skills across courses. And so I do think that teaching kids how to learn is at the core of an IB education. It wasn't always at the core of the grading element of it. So as you heard Mr. Hill say, we're calling it standards-based learning and grading because really those two things are, they work together in a school, and we grade students in that we provide them feedback for what they're learning, but also for how they're learning. And so we wanted these practices to align so that our classes and students that come through George Mason High School, the emphasis in the classroom, in the curriculum, as well as in the feedback that they receive is on how they're learning more than just what they're learning. So here is, I'm going to walk through these definitions and benefits of SBL&G, but I will, oh, excuse me, next slide. Okay, so students, here's some elements of the program. Students receive feedback about their proficiency, and that is in a variety of forms: numerical, letters, comments on tests, quizzes, projects that students do. And that feedback is aligned to our NYP subject-specific criteria. Dr. Dippold's going to get into some of these specifics in a little bit later, but we wanted to emphasize that overlap there. As an IB school system, this practice of standards-based learning and grading really does align to our instructional and assessment practices. And just so that you all know the background here, there were a lot of teachers that as we reviewed our NYP program years ago, we said, wow, this really makes sense if we were to adopt some of these new grading practices, since this is at the essence of the IB program. And so we started that way as teachers sort of looked at this and said, you know, I think it makes sense to re-examine our grading practices to better align with our instructional practices. It shifts the conversation from what grade did I earn to a focus on learning, feedback, and growth. And that's something that we, as educators, that's what we aspire towards, is we want our students to think about, what am I learning? How am I growing? And then the fourth item here is a little bit more practical, but FCCPS is at the high school level, we're no longer sort of grading students based on 2 semesters of grades. Students get a single year-long grade in a course. And this aligns us with the rest of the public school divisions in the state of Virginia. And so, again, this practice is just sort of in alignment with some of the other things happening in our high school here.
If I, Mr. Lab, if I can just add to that, and I think it's an important component to recognize when we think about the student having the ability to show mastery in that particular content area, where it's not a snapshot in time, right? It actually can happen throughout the entire year. And that's an important piece to what we believe, and instructionally how our teachers are designing the curriculum and the content. And so when you think about a student having an entire year to show that, that's also an important piece to alignment. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think it's important just to emphasize.
Yeah, thank you. That is a critical point to it. These core principles about the practice come from a text that we as a school, when we adopted SB, L, and G last year, our teachers read through a research-based text about the program across education. So we highlight some things here for you to see about what's sort of underpinning our work. The program provides specific, actionable, meaningful feedback, separating behavior from standards of proficiency, allowing students to demonstrate that mastery over time that Mr. Hills was talking about, that there's opportunities for growth, and that the grade really does reflect how much a student has learned rather than when they've learned it. And I'll reiterate our talking points from last year is that we believe that this practice is more accurate, more equitable, and more aligned with our programs here on the whole. And so that's a little bit of the why for why we're here. I'll let Dr. Dippold talk a little bit about some of the research that goes into this.
Thank you so much. So I also see many familiar names here, and I'm new to NYP coordinator, but the past 15 years I've been at Henderson. So really I've been at Henderson before NYP started, when we started NYP, and now with the journey of SB, L, and G. So I really believe in this. I know this is great for kids. And I do want to share right now just a little research from two studies. And the first one was in Kentucky, and it was at a high school. And essentially, when the school went to standards-based grading practices, they saw a stronger correlation between grades and state test scores. So again, kind of what Mr. Lobb said, that accuracy. Students know kind of where they are, and it supports where they were on the state test as well. And this is including minority and economically disadvantaged students. The study also showed an increase in achievement. And then the second study, again, looked at 5 middle schools in the Midwest and showed a strong relationship between math inventory, a scholastic mathematics inventory, and the end of course grades. So kind of these two research studies kind of summarize that there's an increase in student performance on state tests, and again, more accurate alignment between the student's grade as well as how they did on their state test. So again, just a little background on this approach. Okay. So the next section of our presentation is on PowerSchool. Next slide, please. So just to provide clarity, PowerSchool is the only platform where grades will be officially reported. So that means including quarter grades, and then also end of the year grades as well. Now, Schoology, especially in our virtual world, many teachers use it for feedback. And students turn in assignments, especially in this virtual environment, on Schoology. So that's kind of the difference between the two. So as a parent, if you want to see how your child is progressing within their classes, you would go to PowerSchool. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, as Mr. Lobb mentioned, NYP does have 4 criterion, and they are criterion A, criterion B, criterion C, and criterion D. And we'll look at an example in a few minutes. But each criterion is scored on a 0 through 8 achievement scale. It is not a percentage. So a 4 out of 8 does not mean they got a 50%. It means they're in a developing range. And then a missing code, which is new this year, means it was not turned in. So as you can see on the chart here, you can see beginning, developing, proficient, and expert. So your child and you will kind of know based on the score they earn, where they kind of are within that range for each of the criterion. And each of these descriptors will fit the assessment. So for example, criterion A for many of the subject areas is on knowing and understanding. So that may be more aligned to like a test, for example. So that's just one example there. Feedback will be given in order to target progress toward their learning target. And then student reflection, which is a critical component of NYP, may be a component of formative assessments as well. And on the right-hand side, you see the PowerSchool codes. So you'll begin to see for formative and summative assessments that they will be coded EXP for expert PROF for proficient, DEV for developing, BEG for beginning, and missing is missing work.
Dr. Dippold, I think this slide is very helpful for our families and for our students to really kind of understand where they stand. And we understand that this is kind of a shift, right?
Mhm.
So our teachers are doing a really nice job in the individual classes using and spending time to say, okay, this is what, let's say, a proficient actually looks like. And I think, the experience that many of our 8th grade students had last year is helping them understand the vernacular and the wording behind it. What we're really trying to do when we think about a partnership between parents and the school is, let's say a student receives a 5. A 5 is proficient. And so, Dr. Dibble, can you just help us kind of understand how a student might perceive that? I received a 5 out of 8. Oh my goodness, that is not a good score, when in actuality, that means they're doing very well and they're at the proficient level.
Sure. So especially at the formative level, when they get the formative assessment back, they'll want to look at the rubric and say, look at the rubric first, understand what it says. They received a 5. And then kind of the goal is really to use that formative and understand, okay, this is where I currently am. Where do I need to head before I get to the summative task? So really, it is an opportunity to reflect and grow. And that's what we're really emphasizing this year as well, is that formative is really important for students to take and say, kind of, where am I? What do I need to do? And how am I going to, what's my action plan to kind of improve for the summative assessment?
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So as Mr. Lobb and I mentioned, NYP have specific criterion, and this is just a quick overview of our 8 subjects and each of their criterion. So again, you can see how they're a little different, but they're aligned to the specific content or subject. Okay, so now diving into more of the grade book. So again, there are 3 categories. The first one is practice. It is purposely broad, and it's enough to encompass many aspects that support the learning toward a criterion, but is not directly related to it. So for example, it could be a homework. It could be a vocabulary quiz. It could be things that students are just practicing, either a skill or practicing their knowledge on, and building towards a formative assessment. It is not factored into their child's criterion score and grade. So in PowerSchool, what you'll see is what I have here, for example, sample practice 1. You'll see the category on the left is practice, and you'll see it out of 25. Now you won't see a 22 out of 25 there. What you're gonna have to do for practice assignments is click on the view, and then in this example, you see that in the view box, it says a 22 out of 25. Okay, the second category is formative assessments. It's an assessment that gives students an opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding at that time and receive feedback to support success on their summative assessment. Again, it is not factored into their overall score and grade. And formative assessments will always be out of a 0 through 8 based on how many criterion they have. So each criterion will be 0 out of 8. In this case, there are 2 criterion, so it'll be out of 16 points. So I provided an example here just to kind of take kind of an abstract concept and make it concrete for you. So in this example, the student took a formative on a persuasive essay outline, and they earned a 3 out of 8 on criterion A and a 4 out of 8 on criterion B. As you can see here, and what we kind of already mentioned is that they're in the developing range. So that's what you'll see when you look at the 0 through 16. You'll see developing. And then what you have to do is click on that blue button. It's kind of like a blue graph. And then it will show you the specific criterion scores. So in this case, again, student earned A, 3, and B, 4. Okay, and the last category is summative assessments. So again, this is kind of the summary information of what students have learned based on the formative assessments, based on all the practice they've done. So the summative assessments are kind of that summary of information at the end, either of a unit or a learning period. know that there may be multiple summative assessments within a unit. So for example, when I taught civics, I would have most units I'd have a project, and I'd also have a test. So again, many teachers may also in science, for example, have a lab and a test or a project. So know that there may be more than one summative for each unit. Again, the summatives are based on 0 through 8 on how many criterion are being assessed, and they do factor into your child's quarter criterion scores. So in this case, it's a persuasive essay. Again, the formative aligned to the summative task. The student earned a 6 out of 8 on criterion A and a 5 out of 8 on criterion B. So they did show growth. As you can see also below, I do have a screenshot that they did receive proficiency. And then you see their specific scores. And again, at the end of each quarter, students will earn a best fit score based on summative assessments for each criterion A, B, C, and D. So best fit means looking at the body of evidence of student progress. They'll receive a score in each criterion A, B, C, and D for each quarter. And then one last thing is if the criterion is not assessed in quarter 1, it will just be left blank. So that's really important. So in this slide, as Mr. Lobb mentioned, SBLNG separates academic from behavior. So the approaches to learning is a great opportunity for you as parents and for students to really understand how they're progressing in their skill development. So for example, as we look at the scale, this looks probably very familiar with the expert, proficient, developing, beginning. And again, it tells you kind of where they are. So for example, this year there are 2 ATLs we are assessing. They're communication skills. So effectively shares thoughts, needs, questions, and information. And this is in a variety of ways in writing, speaking, and listening. So at the end of each quarter, you'll know where your student is progressing on that. And then you can have that conversation at parent conference. Let's say they're developing. What can my child do to grow and improve in their ability to communicate effectively? And then self-management skills, the same. That is where it meets deadlines, maintains systems of organization, manages and reflects effort and attitude. So this year we really consolidated the skills, and we're looking at 3 this year, and we're looking at specific ranges. And again, it provides you as a parent how they're doing on those non-academic skills that are so critical for student performance and student understanding. We are not assessing social skills this year because of the virtual environment. So it will be on the gradebook, but it will be left blank. Okay. So we'll pause here for a second. I know that was a lot of information. And again, we will, the next part kind of dives deeper into the quarter and end of year report card. Okay, so next slide, please.
Just one thing, Dr. Dippold.
Sure.
I know Mr. Laub said we're going to address one of the questions in the chat. It might be a good time, recognizing that you're kind of moving into what it's going to look like throughout the year. And, you know, how in the world am I going to be able to know where my child stands academically if we're just saying that one grade is going to be given at the end of the year? And so what Dr. Dippold is going to describe is taking a look at, let's say, the quarter, and we gave you examples of what it might look like to be proficient in a particular area. So there are still going to be inner remarks, quarter grades, quarter 1, quarter 2. All of those serve as the body of evidence to determine where a student stands at that particular time. So you will have a clear understanding, and we believe more of an understanding with this particular process and method that will really allow students to know where they stand, what they need to improve on, or in fact, impact where they need to receive some enrichment or extension opportunities. So that's kind of the overall take on what that question was, and I'll let Dr. Dipple continue at this point.
Okay. So when you go into PowerSchool, you're going to see something similar to this. It may just be a lowercase I, but you'll see something like this where you'll see the teacher's name, you'll see the course name, and then you'll click on the lowercase I, for example, or in this case, the 0. Okay, next slide, please. And then you'll see something, the first slide will be something like this. So in SB, L, and G courses, you'll see, again, the categories on the left-hand side, the due dates, the categories, and then the assignment. Now, this is a mock test server I used, so not anybody's specific class, obviously with samples in practice. But as you can see, this does provide the scores, and it also provides you a quick snapshot of how they did on it based on the grade. So again, it's based on proficient, proficient, and developing. So you can have a quick overview of how the student did on that particular assignment. The next slide shows you how to dig a little deeper into understanding the specific criterion scores. So for example, how I got to this was I clicked on the blue button, and that opened up and showed me the 3 criterion in the summative assessment at the top.
Okay.
So again, the student scored a 5 out of 8, a 5 out of 8, a 5 out of 8. Again, it's not a percentage, and we are teaching the students, again, to think about it not through a percentage, but kind of a range of where they are. So again, that tells you as a parent how they did on each of those. And then same with the formative sample and the other formative sample as well. So as you can see here, the criterion can be from 1 to all 4 of them as well. So again, you kind of see how the range is and how to read PowerSchool. Okay, so a slight shift this year is our reassessment policy. So there is a revised reassessment policy where summative assessments can only be taken under extenuating circumstances, and that's more of teacher discretion and teacher, individual teachers. Again, we know we're living through a pandemic. This is not a typical year as we're in a virtual environment. So we do recognize that and understand that. But the reason for this shift in policy is aligned to the IB kind of vision, but also in our vision is that we really want students to focus on that formative assessments and really understand, look at that formative, look at the rubric, think about what they did well, what they could improve on, and use that to act on that feedback and to improve and grow for success on the summative assessment. Okay, so now putting this all together, what does this look like at the quarter and end of year reporting, which I know is really important to all parents to fully understand the big picture. So next slide, please.
You don't want to hear this?
I know what you're listening to.
This is the grade standard-based learning and grading.
If we can mute, that'd be greatly appreciated. So this is an example of a world history rubric criterion A. So this is knowledge and understanding. So as you can see, your child gets the rubric early on in the unit before, while they're working on the project or preparing for a test, for example, and they know specifically what they should be looking for, what they should be working towards. So I'm just going to use the 7-8, for example. I'll start with 7-8. So it's consistently uses a range of terminology accurately. And as you can see, when it goes down to 5-6, from consistent, it goes to considerable, 3-4 goes to some, and 1-2 is limited. So we call these kind of command terms, and it tells your student and you exactly what the teacher is looking for. Now, a lot of teachers use task-specific rubrics, which essentially means that they do customize, they use this language, but they kind of tailor it to that specific assignment. So you may see that as well. And then
This is how they do the grading. The grade isn't until the end of the year.
demonstrates excellent knowledge and understanding of content. Again, you see that through developed and accurate descriptions, explanations, and examples. And then you see the next one below is similar, but it says substantial. So again, while you're looking at this rubric, or while your child is looking at the rubric, really kind of the goal is for them to have a good understanding and be able to kind of vision of what they need to do in order to achieve that specific range score. Okay, so here is an example of a World History 2 SBL and G report card. As you can see in Q1, again, this is fictitious, Q1, you see that this teacher assessed on 3 of the criterion. They didn't assess on criterion B, so that's why it's left blank. And as you can see here, the student did progress throughout the year on pretty much all the criterion. And then you can see, again, Q4 is based on all their work throughout the year, based on best fit of their progress throughout the year. And how we convert here is we look at Q4 and we add it up. And it's actually a 26, and it's actually a 6. So if we click on the conversion chart, Mr. Hills, can you click on the conversion chart, which is in the lower left-hand corner? We'll look at a 26. Okay, and this is only at the end of the year. So again, we looked at Q4. So a 26, if we look at, thank you. Okay, at a 26, we see it right here under grade boundaries. So again, how we got that score was adding up criterion A, B, C, and D at the end of Q4. And the student earned an A, and they earned an NYP grade of a 6. And what an NYP grade of a 6 means is really to the right, that paragraph. Again, it says, this is where it says, yep, what Mr. Hills just highlighted. And that just tells you, again, these are kind of 2 languages. NYP, which is international system, and then the US system is the A through F. So in this case, the child earned the A, and they earned the NYP grade of 6. And then the A does go into the final transcript. So just like a traditional course, all that will show up on the transcript is the final grade, the year 1, for example. That's what we call it. So in this case, the student earned an A. We don't show Q1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So next slide, please. Oh, okay, thank you. All right, and so this slide, you can see here, is the approaches to learning. So as I mentioned before, each quarter your child will get a score from beginning to expert on how they performed in these 2 specific ATL skills. So again, we're not assessing social skills, but it will be on the report card. So as you can see here, they progressed on communication skills from B to E and ATL skills from D to P throughout the year. So again, that gives you a range of how they did within those 2 specific skills. And again, that's separating the academic from the behavior and skill approach. Okay, so as I kind of mentioned when we looked at the conversion chart, and we do live in these kind of 2 worlds, the NYP international world, and then our American system A through F. So know that during each quarter, you will only see the NYP criterion scores, which are 0 to 8. And again, thinking about that chart I showed you at the beginning, from beginning to expert. So again, each quarter they'll receive an A, B, C, and D. And then the IB NYP scale is only at the end of the year and it comes from the conversion chart. Okay, so this part goes into how can you support your child with standards-based learning and grading. So as we think about sort of the approach behind standards-based learning and grading, it's all about growth. It's all about learning and growth. So I did provide an article that I think is from a teacher perspective on talking about it through kind of a lens of working with parents or just anybody who wants to think through kind of growth mindset. So really know that this is a journey. And when we look at where your student is progressing, we look at it through the lens of what do they do well, what is an area of growth, and then what's the next action step for your child. So it's a cyclical process of learning, reflecting, and then acting on that learning progression. The next part, as I mentioned before as well, or actually let me step back for a second. Teachers are also modeling this growth mindset, this idea of the power of yet, of mistakes are natural. So that's a really important part, that formatives are just a snapshot of where you are, but it's not, you know, the final determination. Even if a summative assessment, a student score is not where they want to be, they do have the whole year. And one summative is not going to tank them because it's progression throughout the year. So we really approach this through the growth mindset at school, and we encourage you to do that as well. The next strategy is formative discussion. So really encouraging your child to look at that rubric. I know when I was teaching, before standards-based learning and grading, I'd have students, you know, I'd write comments, I'd write descriptions, I'd write, give them a quiz grade or a test grade, and they'd look at it, look at the grade, and then put it to the side. So we're trying to shift that because we're really focusing not on the grade. Grades are important. We definitely understand that, but really the learning process with the formatives. So that's really what I want you to take away, is that how you can support your child is to encourage them to review the rubric, to look at the feedback, and to say, what do you still need to do in order to be successful on the summative task? And again, the summative task can be like a project, it could be a test, it could be an essay, a research paper, it could be a lab. So those are examples. And the teacher, again, is there to support your students' learning and give them feedback on the formative assessments. Okay, and the last piece is self-monitoring and self-evaluation. And again, this is something that we encourage you to do as well. And I'll use an analogy for this. So sports, for example, with basketball. Before, at the end of the first half, for example, at halftime, the coach and the players get together and they talk about how the first half went and what they need to do in the second half to be successful. That's kind of self-monitoring, kind of monitoring your current progress. In standards-based learning and grading, we relate that to the formative assessment. This is where I currently am, and where am I headed is the summative assessment. And then the self-evaluation is, you know, right before I turn in this project, I look at the rubric and I say, where am I? And do I need to make any tweaks still before I submit it? For example, if it's a project, lab, or essay. And then in the sports, that would be like the end of the game, coming up with a plan the last minute or 30 seconds. So again, all these strategies are here to support you and your child. We did also provide some additional resources. So the first one is, again, focusing on that learning mastery approach, which is a huge part of standards-based learning and grading. And then also Perfect World is one with no grades, and it just discusses the practices of SBL&G and some focus on learning. So I encourage you to look at those and to use it as a way to kind of understand more about the philosophy and background of this approach. Okay, so thank you so much. And we are going to put the survey in the chat. And the survey is if you want a copy of this presentation. And And if there's nothing else, I have kind of finished that part of the presentation. Mr. Locke, do you have anything to share?
No, yeah, thank you, Dr. Dippold. I think that if you'd like, Mr. Hills, there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I can start there if we have questions. Mr. Hills, does that sound okay?
Yeah, I think that's great. I just stopped the screen share, and so we'll go ahead and jump to the questions.
Great. I'm going to work backwards, or I'll start at the top here. I think that Mr. Hills answered the first question. There was a comment about the scales using beginning and developing, and I think Dr. Dippold talked about the growth mindset. That's really important in this process as well for students and for teachers alike. There was a question about someone mentioning that their daughters are not in classes that were on our list, but they are have formative and summative coursework. And what does that mean? So, Mr. Hills, is it okay if I talk about formative and summatives in general? So, for everyone here, the concept of a formative and a summative assessment is not particular to standards-based grading. It's not particular to NYP. That is educational practice writ large, like across the world. So we may have in the past used terms such as the quiz that leads up to the test. Well, the quiz is a formative assessment. That is that it informs the teaching and learning that goes on. It gives the teacher a sense of understanding of how much does Rory know about algebraic equations in advance of our test on algebraic equations. And I may, as a teacher, need to adjust how I'm preparing Rory for the algebra test based on the quiz results. And it gives Rory a sense of what he might need to study in advance of the test. That's just one example of a formative assessment, a discussion that we have in class, the moment when I ask Rory in class, hey, can you solve problem 3 for us and show me what you know? These are all formative assessments. And then a summative assessment is any assessment that I always used to talk with teachers about, like, summative sounds like summary. It's kind of like a summary of what we have right now. So as Dr. Dippold was talking about in his classes, where he might have a project and a test as summative assessments, those are providing a summary of students' learning up to that point, right? So he's just completed a unit. So the project summarizes for him as a teacher what the student knows and is capable of doing, in the way that the test summarizes what he knows and is capable of doing. We use those terms in this practice and in NYP specifically because they have, I guess because they're tied to specific elements in our grade book, right? That a formative assessment does not count towards the student's final grade in SBL&G. A summative assessment is what counts towards the final grade, but the concepts are universal. So I hope that helps explain that question. We have another question here about if a 3 and a 4 in a rubric has the same criteria, how does the teacher objectively choose between the two? And is there an objective measure for substantial versus excellent? Rory, are you able to speak to this, to the NYP criteria grading?
Sure. So the teacher looks at, and also the teacher looks at where the student is and kind of looks at the rubric and says if they're more towards it, they look at kind of, are they leaning towards more proficient, but they're still in the developing, they'd be a 4. They'd be a 4. And then if it's more towards leaning towards the beginning, but they're in the proficient range, they're not hitting all those strands, it's more of a 3. So it's based on, and again, these are based on multiple strands. So so the strands are the lowercase i's. So it's kind of multiple factors to that piece. But again, it is looking at kind of where are they leaning more towards? Is it kind of, they're almost at proficient, then it would be a 4, but they're not there yet. And then if it's leaning towards almost beginning, but again, most of the strands are in that developing, it kind of hits the 3.
And I think that this is where some of those task-specific rubrics can come in really helpful. So what a 3, if you were to say we were in a science class and the assessment was to complete a lab project, the task-specific rubrics, so achieving a 3 in this particular science project, that should have some details in there from the teacher for this particular project, whereas achieving a 4 would have some details that differentiate there. And that would look different than the details that appear in the 3 and the 4 for the English essay. There's a question about explaining how reassessments work. Rory, do you want to walk us back through that?
Sure. So reassessments, again, this year are based on extenuating circumstances. So again, we know we are living through a pandemic, a challenging year. So those are conversations between a student and a teacher of if a reassessment is, the possible reason behind that. But again, the focus is really for this year, we're really focusing on that formative. So that formative feedback and acting on it. So really the formatives are aligned to the summative. So really that is the focus, and summatives are reassessed, not rarely, again, extenuating circumstances.
Mr. Hills, this may be one that you may know more specifics about. There's a question about seniors requesting first quarter grades that go to colleges.
Yep.
And how that would work on a transcript, with questions, will they have a quarter grade on the SBL classes?
Yes. So one of the things that when we talk about the shift in moving to a year-long grade model, that doesn't change how grades are adjudicated, right? So a student is going to have a quarter 1 grade, a quarter 2, 3, and 4 grade. And so for a senior under this circumstance, absolutely, they would see quarter 1. And colleges and universities understand what that means, what that looks like. They know that it serves as a kind of barometer for where that particular student stands at a moment in time. That's typical to what other Virginia public schools do. So yes, they will absolutely receive that quarter 1. Typically, with that process, they usually ask for quarter 1 and 2 if it's around the time of January. But if a college wants to see that quarter 1, yes, they will receive that grade as well.
So, and then there were a couple of folks who are saying they're new to FCCPS. So first of all, welcome. Then could we clarify why some classes are using SBLNG and some are not? And those that are not, are they not using the NYP criteria? I mean, I can try this, Roy, if that's okay.
Sure, I can jump into.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's because we're scaling this program up. We're starting with a few classes as we start to roll it out across the district. So rather than adopting it school-wide or district-wide, we're starting with some core classes that we feel like we can get the ball rolling with that. But all of our NYP classes are using NYP criteria. So I alluded to this, but I don't think I spoke about it clearly, that the genesis of this program came from a lot of our NYP teachers recognizing that we were using and being coached to use, as we adopted this program, the NYP criteria to assess student work. So I was an English teacher for a long time, and I'll talk by way of example. If I taught 9th grade English class that was an NYP class, and I asked students to complete a persuasive essay, let's say, I may have had my own rubric for that. But as we became an NYP school and I adopted the criteria associated with the NYP program, I would look at my persuasive essay and say, okay, well, I need to give students feedback based on this criteria, or I need to make sure that my task that I'm asking them to do is also aligned with what we want them to learn in the NYP criteria. So I would make those adjustments and I would say, okay, so now I need to provide them some feedback based on these 4 criteria. Well, we would do that, and then we would turn around and enter a numerical grade into our grade book using our American system. And so a lot of teachers said, this seems sort of silly and duplicative, I don't know what the word is, double work. So that was sort of the idea, was that we felt like, hey, let's use these criteria a bit more authentically. So all of our NYP classes are still using those criteria. And I think this may explain why someone else was asking the question why in a math class they were still seeing those numbers, right? If you're an NYP class, our teachers are using those NYP rubrics and the numbers associated with them to provide feedback to students. Those rubrics are built around that growth mindset and about helping them develop along the way. And so our classes that are officially SB, L, and G have sort of fully adopted that and into the grading element as well. Mr. Hills, Dr. Dipple, does you feel like that is accurate for what we're seeing?
And
Yeah.
I would add, we also had to modify and adapt our plan based on school closure in March and kind of looking at pressing needs, and then kind of this fall, kind of the work ahead. So it is, again, the goal is to continue to grow with the teachers implementing SBL and G.
And I appreciate you emphasizing that, and you said it earlier, all of our courses, 6 through 10, are NYP courses. So you're going to see a lot of the similarities that exist, whether or not they fall under the umbrella of SB, L, and G or not. A 10th grade math course is going to be able to use the NYP criterion to make sure that students are receiving that level of feedback and they have a clear and comprehensive understanding of where they are in the particular course. And I think that's an important piece to what we're doing here.
And I think that is our last question is, do we have a time frame for when all classes will be transitioned to SBL? I think the caveat to that is COVID. I think that I know I was part of a team with Rory in the spring, and we were working on this, and then the world spun a different way, and I don't know if Mr. Hills or Dr. Dibble, we can clarify that at this time.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a good point. You know, we obviously didn't expect to have happen what happened months ago and what is continuing to happen. And so, you know, our goal is to make sure that as strong IB learners, we're reflective in this process. We want to make sure that our students, our faculty, and all of our community members and parents have a real true understanding of why we're doing this, right? And that's a piece of what we were really trying to make clear today. We believe that the pedagogy, the practices that we're using when it comes to SBL and G are important for our students. And so when we think about adopting this across the entire school, I mean, that is a goal of ours. But with any goal, there are necessary steps that we must take in order to make sure that all of our students are ready. And so I think, that's kind of a long-winded answer right there, but I want to make sure that we're clear. We're not jumping into anything. We're doing this the right way. And this is what the presentation was about today.
There doesn't appear to be any other questions in the chat. And unless there's anything else.
All right, please make sure that you do fill out the survey. Thank you, Dr. Dippold, for updating that to include all of our high school levels. We're going to go ahead and end it here, but I will say that this has been recorded. So for any families or any of your friends who couldn't make it, please let them know that we're actually going to put it on our website. It will be up tomorrow before noon. If they have access to our website, they can go ahead and review this presentation at that time. Thank you all for being with us this morning. Mr. Laub and Dr. Dippold and Mr. Sorensis and I were all kind of joking prior to this meeting saying we would love to do this in person, and we are keeping our fingers crossed that we're close to being there. So thank you all. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session or in the future.